Good morning, everyone. Jim Laird here. I should be joined by Dr. Stillman shortly, but we'll get started anyways. The topic of today's discussion is an article that's in the description about Ozempic. You've heard everything about semi-glutide and all these good things about it causing thyroid cancer, and then you hear about people having, extreme muscle loss on losing significant amounts of bone mass and muscle mass on semi-glutide. And so I've been diving into this a lot lately. I've actually been talking to a number of different doctors and physicians that actually use these things in their practice along with lifestyle change. So I'm going to give you like a little bit of a different perspective on this, um, especially coming from my background of performance enhancing drug use. Okay. Most of the people that would get themselves in trouble with performance enhancing drugs or any kind of drug, like when I look at pharmaceuticals or fat burners or any of these things, I look at it as a tool, right? So most of the people that would get in trouble when they took steroids or anabolics would be the people that would rely on the drug itself to get them stronger. They would ignore their sleep, they would ignore their nutrition, and a lot of times it's younger guys, they can get away with a lot. But if you look at like ephedra, when I was in the heyday, when I was in my early years of college, the Dan Duchesne, the OG of performance enhancing drugs, um, the mad scientist from bodybuilding or muscle media 2000 days. They had the caffeine ephedra aspirin stack, which is a great stimulant combination of 200 milligrams of aspirin, 25 milligrams of ephedra, 200 milligrams of caffeine, 25 milligrams of ephedra, and one aspirin. Okay. People were using that like crazy, and they ended up banning ephedra because this kid who was dehydrated, um, playing out in like 105-degree heat, took a bunch of it and ended up having a heart attack. So they blamed it on the ephedra, and they banned ephedra, and you couldn't get it anymore. All of a sudden, it disappeared off all the markets, right? And the same thing would be effective for any of the performance enhancing drugs. The guys that would usually have the big side effects are the guys that just took more and more and more, right? And the same thing is kind of happening with this semi-glutide stuff, Ozempic stuff, is it's people that are looking for a quick fix to a problem. They want to lose 10, 15 pounds, but they don't want to change their lifestyle. And so what happens is there's a few mistakes that people are making with it. Is one, they're not making the lifestyle change necessary to get the results, right? Two, they're taking it in too big of a dose. So what happens is they take this huge bolus once a week because people are so afraid of needles, and it shuts their appetite down. Like, it's very difficult to eat on this stuff, right? So they can't eat, and then they end up, if they are training, um, they don't recover from that. So even if you're trying to lose weight, you still have to eat enough protein, 1 gram of protein per lean body mass, right? So if you're 300 pounds and you want to lose weight and you have your lean mass is 200, then you should be eating 200 grams of protein a day. You don't need to eat 300. You need to eat that 200, right? That's going to help you maintain muscle mass. So what's been happening is these people, they haven't changed their lifestyle. They're not lifting weights. They're not eating enough. Their diet, they already go into this non-optimized. Their hormones are trash. They have a massive inflammation. And then they look for this magic pill or magic shot to basically help them lose weight. So they have the combination of low hormone level, usually with inflammation, and usually they've already got a shitty diet. So they take this stuff that stops them from eating. They probably weren't eating enough protein in the first place. And so they take this big bolus. They don't eat for several days. Maybe they try and work out still. Their hormones get even worse because they're not getting the nutrients that they need because they're not eating. And if they're training, who knows what's going to happen. So they end up in time losing muscle mass, and they lose fat too, but even they lose bone mass because they don't have the nutrients they need, right? So the smarter way to do it and using it as it's like metformin with diabetics, right? If you give metformin to diabetics, it improves their health outcomes. But the problem is the diabetic basically doesn't change their lifestyle. They don't live an insulin-controlled life through getting outside, through controlling their insulin levels through diet, getting outside, and moderate exercise. They continue to eat garbage. They continue to drink. They continue to do all the things. The metformin buys them some forgiveness, but over time they have to keep upping the dose of the metformin, upping the dose of the metformin, upping the dose of the metformin, instead of getting their lifestyle under control, where the metformin becomes almost an anti-aging drug. It's really a plant. It becomes an anti-aging drug with a cleaner insulin-controlled lifestyle, outdoor lifestyle, right? So people that are type 2 diabetic, they prolong their life because they're inflamed, they're not in good health, and the metformin buys them time. It would be even better if they change their lifestyle, then they'd get a lot of positive benefits. So the people that I've seen using semi-glutide, first of all, I'm not advocating that you take it. It's an individual decision. But you want to be highly educated when you look at this stuff. And I don't jump to judgment, because there's a time and a place for tools. The problem is when you rely on one tool too much, right? And you start taking things in large doses. Like my video the other day said, anything at a certain dose becomes a poison. But there's been people getting really good results with this stuff. And the way they've been doing it is basically they spread the dosage out over a week, instead of having this massive bolus, this big spike in the substance, which totally shuts appetite off. They spread the dosage out over a week, maybe 3 times a week, so it's more even, it's not as high. They do lifestyle change, okay? They lift weights, they clean up the diet. The thing that these physicians, they optimize hormones first before they do this, right? So that if you are eating, you're going into calorie restriction, you want to make sure your hormones are in a good place, because if you go into calorie restriction and your hormones are already bottomed out, they're going to get worse. So what these doctors have been doing is they normalize hormones first, they do lifestyle change, and the thing that they've noticed is that the semi-glutide or the Ozempic then allows these people to learn better. They just have a much easier time not being a human vacuum cleaner. And they say it does something to them mentally, where it helps them change habits. And I don't know what the mechanisms are on that, but these doctors have seen these incredible results with this, because a lot of the application of these peptides has been just people basically just taking it as a magic pill, instead of making the lifestyle changes in conjunction with it. So you can take it in small, it's just like you have a bodybuilder, right? And if you have a bodybuilder who, their diet's sloppy, their lifestyle's sloppy, and then they take massive, doses of stimulants to try and burn that body fat off, instead of, cleaning up the diet, adding in some walking, having an intelligent training program, and then all of a sudden the fat burner becomes an accelerant, and they're on, hormones, which keeps their hormones up so they don't bottom out. That fat burner becomes a tool, right, that speeds up the process, and you don't have to take it in a very high of a dose. And it's the same thing for this Ozempic semi-glutide. These people are using it as like the home run hitter, instead of using it as a tool to basically enhance and make habit change a lot easier. That's why. Good morning, Dr. Stillman.
Good morning, everyone. Just getting in a little bit late from my church small group.
That's nice, bright blue.
Were you just saying nice things about Ozempic, Jim?
I was, because
I may have to excommunicate you from the Church of Dr. Stillman.
Okay.
Or burn you at the stake upside down, as you like to joke.
Well, I just explained that, from my past performance enhancing drug use, I look at all these things as a tool.
I agree, and I'm being
yes.
silly, right? But
And
I
I
mean,
gave the example. I gave the example of metformin. The reason diabetics, the metformin buys them
sure,
time, but the problem is if they actually change their lifestyle and use the metformin, they would get incredible results. The problem is they don't change the lifestyle, they don't fix the inflammation, they don't fix the diet, and then they have to take more and more metformin to manage their problem, and then they get in more trouble.
That's it.
And I've been studying this a lot in a group of doctors that have been using this in their practice. And the things they see is one, they start with lifestyle habit change
No, I know.
and hormone
Yeah.
optimization. And then they spread the bolus out throughout the week because
Yeah.
most people, what's happening when they take a huge bolus. They don't eat for 2 or 3 days, and they're already trashed. So hormones are in the bucket. So they end up losing fat and muscle, and they end up getting in big trouble because they're using it as instead of using it as something to speed the process up, they're just using it as a magical fix, which there are really no magical fixes.
I don't know what you're talking about, Jim. Magical fixes? There's no magical fixes? You sure about that?
Generally speaking,
I get a lot of
no.
Facebook ads about magical fixes, Jim.
Well,
And you think they're all lying to me?
That appeals to our human nature for.
It does. But so when I looked at, because I mean, I know that the title of this is Ozempic and thyroid cancer.
Yeah, I used that article about the
Right.
link to thyroid cancer, which they didn't even take into account obesity in that study.
That's interesting, yeah. But I think my point why I wanted to talk about this study on one of our morning lives is that one of the big problems that we have in medicine is the problem of safety monitoring and safety data. And, I hate to say this, but it's true. A lot of the time we don't know something's bad for us until the bodies are stacked so high and so deep that the epidemiologists can't pretend they're not there anymore.
Right.
You have to understand something. A lot of people have to die from an exposure for us to pick it up in the medical literature the way that things are studied. I've thought about this a lot because, my major in college was environmental health. And if you look at something like let's say that you're in a developing country that's going, and I could use any number of examples for this, by the way, this is only one. And you want to know what impact 10 additional factories have on a small city where they're going to decrease the amount of light by X or Y or Z amount per year. Okay. This is a very complex problem. And every single problem, whether it's a drug or, cell phone radiation or air pollution or water pollution or a change in diet or a change in something as seemingly inconsequential as whether or not you fluoridate your salt. For the record, salt is fluoridated in Central America. That's why I don't use the table salt in Central America. But anyway, you have to figure out, okay, how is it actually going to affect it? Like, how would the air pollution drift over the cities, and how many more cloudy days will we have, and how will it change, things like dew points and thermodynamics, and, then how much sun gets to the city, and then how will that affect population health? And if you were really going to study things like this, you'd actually have to take cities that are virtually identical in latitude, in longitude, in climate, in temperature, in demographics, in median net income, in race. I mean, this would be very hard to do, especially in a country as heterogeneous as the United States. And then the other problem is the time distance, the time difference, the time lapse, time delay, right? So let's say that we want to know like how safe a product like Ozempic is. Well, we can do a safety study for 6 months in 6 months. We can do a safety study for 10 years in, let's call it 11 years, because you got to maybe, analyze that data. But one of the problems that we see in medicine is that things you do have a cascade of consequences years and years and years from now. For example, if you're a lifeguard in your teenage years and you get sunburned a lot that summer, that actually sets you up for more skin cancer later in life, even though the skin cancers aren't going to arise until your 40s or your 50s or your 60s, right? And that's why, when Jim and I look at problems like this and when we're counseling, people, patients, clients, one of the big things that we're always focused on is what are your goals and what are your priorities because if you're looking at something like, if your goal is to just never have skin cancer, right, which is a very myopic goal, it only kills 12,000 people every year. That's very few. It's the most detectable cancer that we face compared to, say, the other big killers like lung and colon cancer and pancreatic cancer and other epithelial cancers, which are the vast majority of, overwhelming majority of cancer deaths, all of which are linked to lack of sun exposure, all of which are linked to low vitamin D. So
It's also one of the easiest to treat too, correct?
Yes, not only the most. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you're going to get a cancer, skin cancer is arguably the one that's going to be the easiest to detect and the easiest to treat definitively, right? Now people are afraid of melanoma with good reason, because it's frankly it's terrifying when it metastasizes. But that's why I didn't used to recommend this, but I recommend that everyone at 35 start to go to a dermatologist to get a skin check every year, because you need to know. I mean, we've had, professional acquaintances, patients, clients who've had, things that have had to be cut out early in life, which is really important because you don't want to sit on that. But anyway, I hope people understand this concept of safety. And I think a lot of people want to tune out from this type of message because they're looking for someone who's just going to give them certainty. They're just going to give them false assurance. Well, you just need to do this. Well, you just need to do that. Well, you just need to take this supplement or that lifestyle hack, or don't eat this or don't eat that. It's never that simple. And you have to define your goals. And one of the things about, drugs, as I was saying, is that often we only find that they create a liability within 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And the way that our drug monitoring is set up, it isn't set up in order to find small associations. It's set up to find large associations. And that may not seem like a big deal, but on a population level, we're dealing with amazing amounts of disease that are the direct side effects of drugs because of how many drugs are being used, right? So it's one thing if you're just thinking about, okay, well, maybe we only get one extra case of some illness from using this new drug. Ozempic is just an example, right? But there's not just one new drug. This is a whole class of drugs, these peptides. Then there's other classes of drugs. There's new ones coming out all the time. I mean, the way that this is proliferating is just amazing. And this is another thing that we need to talk about and that you need to be aware of if you're in the health and wellness info space, is the peptide world, and what we might even call the peptide revolution. Because one of the most interesting things about Ozempic is that it's a peptide rather than a conventional pharmaceutical drug. And you might not understand the distinction there, but to make it very simple, peptides are proteins, and they usually have to be, I think they have to be injected, frankly. Very few of them would make it through your gastric juice intact, and it's hard to get them through the skin because of the skin barrier. But the thing is, if you inject these peptides, then you can have massive therapeutic changes. Jim and I are going to be talking a lot more about peptides because of this, what we're both seeing in testing peptides ourselves, talking to patients who are using peptides, some of them under our direction, some of them not, what we're hearing from experts in the peptide world. And with peptides, what's interesting about them is they're bigger molecules, and it's a whole new therapeutic class. But a lot of them are natural. So, for example, one of my favorite peptides, GHK copper peptide, I'm convinced is having beneficial effects because people in this world are copper toxic, which means that they have too much copper, and a lot of that copper is unbound, and it's running around the body creating oxidative stress and, frankly, destroying vital systems within cells and within organs. And that's one reason why so many people feel better with therapeutics that chase copper out of the body. That would be things like vitamin C, particularly at high doses, things like zinc, virtually any other divalent cation like manganese, molybdenum. I already mentioned zinc. And the problem with this, right, or the reason why GHK copper peptide works, aside from chasing up and binding copper, is that it has a lot of beneficial effects at stimulating stem cells, which I'm convinced are being exhausted by our chronically toxic, stress-loaded world. And then it triggers wound healing and tissue remodeling and injury response and repair, which is, again, goes back into the whole, into why they work with stem cells. That therapeutic profile is wild. And what I mean by that is I've got a whole box, and really boxes full of supplements in my kitchen. Very few of them have a therapeutic profile that impressive. And all of them have got lots of, I would say, lots of contraindications. A lot of nutritional gurus, experts, whatever, are not really familiar with the contraindications to using different nutrients and supplements. It's one of the reasons why people typically come to us on a box of supplements and leave on 5 or 6. And then we try and winnow that down as we go, and they get better results with less supplements. But the point and the reason I want to mention specifically this difference between peptides and pharmaceutical drugs is that you're going to be seeing more of them, and because they're natural, by the way, we can't patent a lot of them, which is going to keep them affordable, and that's good. But also because of that, there's not going to be a lot of study of them. And so in some respects, I'm wary of the whole peptide craze because we are not going to get long-term safety data, and we really don't know what's going to happen with a lot of these products.
Well, you have the other, I talked about ephedra before, and they banned ephedra because one kid who was chronically dehydrated, who was playing a sport in extreme heat, keeled over. He took a bunch of ephedra, he keeled over.
I remember hearing about this, yes.
And they discovered that the ephedra hadn't even broken down in his system yet, So they banned it entire. A lot of times there's powers behind the scenes. And I think a lot of this pushback on these peptides is, because this Ozempic, that's one that's actually FDA approved, right?
Right. Well, it's a synthetic, right?
Right.
And so and this is really important for people to understand. Natural products cannot be patented. If your body makes it, you can't patent it. If your body makes it, but you add a proton or a carbon atom or a hydroxyl group or something that makes it special, you can patent it.
Yeah.
And
but my point.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
My point being is there's a lot of compound pharmacies and a lot of research labs that are pumping this stuff out in massive quantities.
Yes.
And it's cutting into the pharmaceutical industry's bottom line.
It is.
And so there's a lot of these peptides have, been studied in the Soviet Union for a long time. They've been studied anecdotally by, people for, going on, some of them 20 years now. And as they become more popular and as people see the effects they have when you combine lifestyle change, when you combine, not eating like an asshole, and taking care of yourself, the results that you can get from using these things in a reasonable manner as a tool and not the foundation of the change is going to be a huge threat to the pharmaceutical industry. So I think a lot of this noise and saber rattling you see about it is to basically scare people.
I have no doubt of that.
And basically protect their industry, right? So they're going to make it very difficult for people to get these things because they want people to have to go through that. How much money do you have to? Is it like $80 million or something to get something FDA approved?
It's a heinous amount of money, and it's you can only do it if you have a patented product. And this is such an important message for people to hear. The patent system in this country was originated as a means to protect an inventor's profit from something they had put years and years of research and development into. But it's turned into this monster that's creating perverse incentives for industries. And this is why we're supposed to be free. It's why we're supposed to be allowed to purchase products and use them as we wish and not have it governed by the nanny state. Because as soon as you've created the power to regulate these peptides at the level of a state or federal authority, this is why the alphabet soup agencies are just so destructive to the economy, to human health, to our very political institutions themselves. It's because it creates this perverse incentive for the industries to basically control politicians and regulatory bodies through campaign finance, so that they can call the shots on what the rules are, and then they can control the market. And that's happened over and over and over again. And it's actually something of a miracle that we still have access to basic things like supplements, because there was a big push back in the 80s and 70s that most people don't know about that included something at the UN called Codex Alimentarius, which was an agenda very similar to recent agendas way back before, a lot of people were aware of what was going on with, let's just call it the agenda to keep everybody sick so that they're more controllable. And I'm wary of peptides, and I made that clear because of our inability, or I'm just going to say the challenges of monitoring how they may affect health in large groups of people over long periods of time. But that skepticism was at first very much. I looked at them and I said, I'm not going to use these in my practice. But I also then looked at the results people were getting. And this came up particularly with LifeWave, which I made a post on yesterday that was, I apologize in advance, it was somewhat long and rambling. But I started to see more and more people coming to me with remarkable reports of these LifeWave patches working, and they work by upregulating GHK copper peptide, which I also read about in Bill Seeds' book on peptides the week before. And his book really opened my eyes to, because he's a physician treating patients, writing about peptides. So many doctors writing books are just celebrity doctors or influencers who just happen to have a doctorate, and they don't really wield therapeutics. It's a little bit like asking someone how to drive a sports car who just gets paid to take photos with them. It's not the same as asking the guy who's actually in the driver's seat. But, natural peptides have so much therapeutic value and so much promise, and we're under so much pressure and stress and in some ways assault from different stresses and toxic exposures that, based on the results I'm seeing people get with peptides, and I mentioned the LifeWave patches, and if people want to know more about this stuff, the links are on my link tree. But the reason that I'm open to them is that as people have more and more stress, you need to do more and more in order to lead a healthy life. And these are tools that we have to put in your toolbox to help you mitigate these problems. Like Jim and I talk a lot about this with EMF, and it came up recently that we heard a testimonial about a product that Jim and I would like to test, but I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get our hands on a demo unit of it that's supposed to mitigate, cellular 5G signals. I probably shouldn't say that word in these if we want to get any reach on social media, huh, Jim? But
the cool waves. It mitigates the cool waves.
Funny euphemisms for this, Jim. So anyway,
we'll have to come up with some code words.
Some code, yeah. Anyway, so I was looking at this product, and I'm always thinking, well, the best thing to do is space and to have, a house on enough land that you're not going to get a lot of this radiation. But as the average person continues to accumulate these devices, there's going to be not much of a place to hide unless you're really comfortable living out in the middle of nowhere. And that's
even then, Elon's going to be beaming it down from a satellite.
And so staying on top of these tools and learning how to use them is really powerful, really important, because we're being asked by our patients and clients who don't want to move, don't want to relocate, don't want to change this, don't want to change that. And we get it. There's so much behavior change that we can sometimes hand to somebody to take on, and we try not to overwhelm people. But we're being asked to do more and more and deliver more and more in a world where it's frankly getting harder and harder to do that. And peptides are one of the ways we're going to. And the other thing is, because peptides are natural, they're being produced by your body. They should have a lower side effect profile. And if anything, more benefit than harm on population health long term. We're seeing this right now in the bioidentical world, where we now have decades of experience and practical experience, as well as research on using bioidentical hormones for the mitigation of aging and then longevity. And people at the first were wondering if using bioidentical hormones would actually prolong life. I think it's going to come out that using bioidentical hormones does prolong life and overall reduces your risk of death. But there's so many caveats to that. And the number one caveat that we always have to mention is the fundamentals. And that comes back to the peptides point, which is that, yes, you can chase these solutions to problems, the peptide, the hormone, the supplement, and we use these things therapeutically. But if you're not doing any of the fundamental things that make you healthy, It's like changing the drapes in a house that's on fire. What is
Well,
the point?
it's just the same as plastic surgery. Like, say you go get some plastic surgery. If that's something you decide to do, good for you. But then you still continue to live like a total tool. You're going to end up in the same place that you were, and it might even look worse, right? So there
Right.
has to be. There's nothing wrong with using these different tools, right? And you just have to know, like, what's the risk. The risk increases as the dose increases. What's the smart way to take this stuff? And you can't build your foundation of your house on magic tricks.
You
The
cannot.
magic tricks needs to be the last thing you worry about. You get everything under control first, and then you can play around with adding little. It's just like training, right? You got to have a good foundation before you start, doing fancy stuff. And
That's it. And that explains why so many people bounce from doctor to doctor to doctor and protocol to protocol to protocol. They don't understand the fundamentals. And that I have to give a plug for our program, the Fundamentals of Wellness, which is enrollment is rolling. It's $99 a month right now. We occasionally have special offers, but $99 a month for 12 months. And you get monthly group coaching with Jim and I. Jim, tell people about, what happened with our group coaching this week. Cause you had, I would describe them as some pretty big wins.
Well, we had one guy who's been in our weight loss program who's lost like 10 pounds in the last month just by walking and getting outside more.
Yeah, 10 pounds in 1 month. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, he's a big dude. So
I was referring specifically to a young mom who's in our Fundamentals of Wellness course.
Oh, yes.
And, she came in having experienced a lot of hormonal dysregulation after a prolonged period of fasting. And, it's one of the things that we see is that people come to us and they enroll in these courses after they've done something drastic.
Correct.
Like doing intermittent fasting or 1 meal a day for 6 months or, a year or whatever. And they're metabolically broken and they need our help. And we wish that they would enroll sooner so that they could ask us these kinds of questions and get the mindset for their wellness right and master the fundamentals before they go off and do something really extreme.
Well, that's the thing. Like,
dysfunction.
And we're not busting on fasting. It has
It has a place.
Just like the ketogenic diet has a place. But if you're, say, if you have a large family and you're breastfeeding an infant,
right,
fasting for multiple days is probably not a good strategy.
It's not compatible with your metabolic needs.
So you have to look at these things that all these people are pushing,
right?
And you have to say, does this fit into where I am? And does this apply to me? And a lot of people have a really hard time figuring that out. And that's where, with our combined experience, we can simplify things for people. And a lot of people also, Alex Ramosi had a great post on this. He's like, a lot of times people have a plan. They just don't follow the plan long enough for them to actually see results. They're constantly, every week, they're like, well, I didn't lose enough.
And he said, I love that he said this because exactly what we see happening with people in their wellness journey. He said, imagining the plan is the fun part, but actually doing the plan is boring. And people don't stick with it. And people will do this. They'll say, I'm going to walk outside. I'm going to go to the beach more. I'm going to cut back from work. But that's not as exciting as imagining the plan. And so that plan gets imagined and then it doesn't get done. And then a new plan with peptides and hormones and fat burners and other supplements and things like that gets imagined when the first plan was really the more sustainable long-term solution to the problem rather than, anyway, you guys get the idea. And I think with that, Jim, we better sign off and get to work.
I think a lot of people in dyers and medical advance.
Got a great question, though. We got to answer this one. Yeah. So the question from Keplix1 is, I think a lot of people on diets are metabolically imbalanced. Constant yo-yo of gain/loss has thrown us there. I constantly think, what's normal eating? What was normal in the 1970s? That is a great observation. And I think Jim, I certainly agree with that. I'm sure Jim does. And I think the key to gaining balance in your diet is actually going to people who seek what a balanced diet is, and then helping you understand when an extreme diet may actually be balancing for you. Because what you all have to understand is that your you're out there on a potentially you're out there on a seesaw where the best thing for you is going to be an extreme diet that helps get you back into balance. But for most of you, you need something in the middle. And that's where a lot of people go wrong. Or you need an extreme diet only for a short period of time rather than for the rest of your life. We can't keep track of the number of people who've come to us who are years into veganism or carnivore or keto and are metabolically broken. And we say, you need to be flexible on this because it may be part of your solution. And they say, no, I'm basically married to this diet no matter what damage it does to me. And now I think we better knock off, Jim, so we can actually
All right.
get everything done we got to get done today. Thanks, everyone.
Have a wonderful day. Today's Thursday, right? So we'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Please obviously this isn't going to get pushed into the algorithm because we're not, politically correct.
We say things like 5G.
Oh, yeah.
They don't want us talking about that unless we're talking it up.
The wave.
We're going to come up with a euphemism. Of course, what's funny, Jim, is it'll become an inside joke for you and I, and our listeners will wonder what on earth we're talking about.
Well, I think I think most people that follow us long enough will figure it out pretty quickly.
I get it. Yeah, it's true. All right, Jim. Take care, everyone.
Great day, everyone. Get outside.
Get outside.